Hey, everybody. On this episode of The Hopeful Has Been, I've got Jordan Berry on here again, and probably you're going to end up being like a reoccurring co host,
I
like a
kind of
long
enjoy
distance
that.
co host.
I enjoy that because I like to get on here and talk. It gives me a place to just talk. And we get to catch
Absolutely.
up. And we get to catch up.
For sure. Because
Yeah.
it's hard going from like working with somebody every day and like seeing you every day to
Yep.
like the long distance thing. Of course, I'll be at your barn in a week.
I
So we're
know.
about to get there. Um, so topic for today, we wanted to talk about, since we're kind of transitioning into the fall season where a lot of big shows are coming up, a lot of finals, that type of thing. And topic for the day is going to be big shows on a budget, because I feel like the average horse owner comes in and is completely overwhelmed. Like we scroll through the barrel horse news and we're like, all right, I want to enter this and this and this and this and this. And maybe we can kind of cover this topic maybe less from a therapy standpoint, not to say that we won't talk about it, but more from just like a horse owner's guide standpoint. Like, what can we do to save money? How do we know where to invest money going to a big show? And, kind of everything from preparation and all the way till we get back home.
I think that would be really good. And I guess we'll just start it off with like where to start. I know I've got some big shows coming up, and I know a lot of people around my area. We have like big NBHA shows. We have state show coming up in 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I don't know. I can't count. But we've got state show coming up, and we've got NBHA Open Worlds coming up. I've got Pink Buckle coming up. So like there's a lot of barrel races that are, coming up. And then there's people that are like, let's put on some shows that are like a Saturday, Sunday deal instead of going like a full 3 day weekend. It's like they'll do Saturday, Sunday shows. And a lot of
Right.
people go start hauling to these shows.
And I guess to kind of preface with what we're considering a big show, not necessarily is the amount of added money. Like, yes, when we're up in the stakes and our entry fees are higher and the added money's higher, we definitely want to be prepared for those shows. But I guess in my thought process, we're talking about multiple runs in one weekend. Because, like, for instance, at NBHA State, do y'all do like two runs in an average, or do y'all make three runs?
We make two runs. So it's round one and round two. Round one is one through whatever, and then it's reverse order the next day. I think.
Gotcha.
Sometimes they do random draws, sometimes, but normally it's reverse order. So
So
it's like
like in Oklahoma, our NBHA group is so big, our state group. We typically have a warm-up race on Friday night that'll have some added money, and then we have Saturday and Sunday runs, and then the average determines your state champions. And
that's
so,
kind of like ours. Our Friday show is normally like a point show, like a
mhm,
warm up show, like y'all would call it, and then we have Saturday and Sunday. But they pay the average, but it's not like you're not making like an average run. Like
right,
Your Friday doesn't count as anything. It's just your
right.
Saturday.
It's just an open jackpot
Yeah.
basically with that amount. That's how ours is set up too. And like the reason that that's important, like the reason that I bring that up is one of the things that it was a little bit of an eye opener, like for Pat, whenever we first got together, because he was used to going to some of the futurities with me, and he was used to going to the quarter horse shows and some of these bigger races. And so the first year that we roll into NBHA State, I told him, I said, okay, we're taking a booth here, we're going to educate. And I said, but you got to realize, I said, this show is going to unfold a whole lot differently than the futurities that you have seen. And it's kind of the Wild West there. And what ends up happening is, because in order to make state show, at least for Oklahoma, um, you have to make three or four races throughout the season. So it's based on attendance going into it. And so what ends up happening is people will qualify their horse at their favorite outdoor pen, let's say. And it's like, boom, I've made my three runs throughout the season. I'm qualified for state show. And then they go to Shawnee is where usually where it's held. And so you have this indoor barn where you have a horse that has qualified on 3 individual runs. Maybe that horse has never been stalled before. And then you head to Shawnee and they have the stalls are in at the back of the warm-up pen or to the side of the arena. So those horses are in the stall the whole time they're in the stalls. They're hearing the announcing, the music, the tractors, the fans, the lights. They're in the barn dust, and so like you go there and they have a whole bunch of colics. The vets work the entire weekend. And then everything ties up. It's a crisis. Horses are not going in the alleyway. Like it is chaos. Horses come in there, duck barrels that have never ducked before. They run down the fence. It's like I said, we call it structured chaos. But I think a lot of that is because they don't think about the preparation that needs to go into that. Where somebody like you or I that's hauling to these bigger futurities, like, okay, we kind of know how to get something prepared, where maybe somebody that their big show for the year is NBHA state and they're just so excited to be there, and then their trip completely gets ruined because there ain't nothing like being up at 2 a.m. with a colic and horse to ruin your whole weekend.
Yeah, that's the same thing. Like how it is here is like it's kind of structured chaos. It's everybody makes their favorite run at basically the barrel race that I'm going to on Saturday. It's a good pin. It's got great ground. Everybody's gonna like get their points there. And I know a lot of people around here, we've had to use that arena this whole year, except like one other arena because of weather. Like all of our shows in the summer are outdoor arenas and they've
Right.
got good footing, good ground. And then when we go up to Liberty, it's like you're kind of in, they've got the really big fans going. They've got the tractors running, and like the warm-up pen is like basically sectioned off from the actual arena by cattle gates and with tarp over it. And these horses are warming up in the back warm-up arena, and horses are coming in and out, and it's like the dirt's hitting the tarp and these horses are panicking. And then
Right.
like Jackson would be proud of me if I knew what the rocks were that they're standing on, but I don't know. So sorry, Jackson, you listen else. But
Because her fiance operates a rock quarry for a living. So
yeah.
Celebrating the non-horse husbands that saddle up and marry us crazy horse women.
Yeah. And he's like, and like he's never been to one. So this will be his first one. Like his first, like this will be Jackson's first big show, and I'm taking a booth to this one as well. So that's even new for me. I don't know how I'm going to run a booth and run at state show and help my Nana take care of her pony too.
Well, luckily you got me coming in for free labor, so
I
work real cheap for Dr. Pepper, so there's that.
That's fine. But I mean, ours are standing on like really, really hard ground. Like, I mean, it's dirt and like little pebble rocks. I don't know what they're called. But they're standing on that. And it's like, that even kind of goes into like all these things and these horses stocking up. Like, that's what I see a lot of is horses stocking up. And I mean, I'm sure I could go into like more detail, but a lot of these horses stock up.
Let's back up. Let's back up and start with preparation. What do we do the 90 and 120 days before a show? Because let's be honest, if we're waiting until 30 days before a big show to try to make sure our horses fit, make sure our nutrition's met, make sure that we checked all of our boxes, realistically, that's too late.
That's not enough time. Like, I have 30-day client horses here, and I'm like, I get to like week 2, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I have 2 weeks left. Right. And I'm like, this has flown by so fast, and I know they're ready, like from a like when they're here standpoint, but like for the people at home, like I'm just saying, like how fast it flies by when I have your horse. Like I'm just like, oh gosh, like this went by quick because you actually have to watch the days and you have to have a plan for that, and having that plan in place to have it planned 120 days out. That's like me with the pink buckle. I had that planned out this time last year. Like, well, I had it planned out when we were at the pink buckle for 2024. Like,
and I feel like that's a realistic way to set a goal, though.
Mhm.
is, you had that, because was last year your first year to go to it?
Yes, it was very
So, it's
good.
like you've gotten in there and you've had the experience. So then you come home and you go, okay, this is what I need to build on for next year. Because, most of these big shows, the dates are going to be approximately the same. Like you at least know what month it's going to be the next year because it's going to be almost on the same dates.
Mhm.
And so, I feel like having that where you have that vision board and keeping yourself accountable is super important, because let's talk about the person. Okay, I'm going to use BBR finals for example because it's in April. How many times do we see the person that kicks their horse out for the winter time, hasn't touched their horse, and then here it is February, or sometimes maybe even the 1st of March, and they go, oh, well, I'm going to enter BBR finals in April. Or case in point, our NBHA state show usually is in April as well. And so April's always a big month in like Oklahoma and Texas area for bigger shows. And so it makes it really hard because most of us that are, really, really keeping our horses on their A game, we may give them a little bit of a break here and there. But for the most part, we're going year round. And it is so much easier to keep a horse in shape if they have some sort of base fitness throughout the year. Let's think about that at like our human athletes. Absolutely are they taking some rest and relaxation breaks in the off season? Sure. But they're not going to just sit on the couch and eat Cheetos and do nothing. They may have a few days coming off of playoffs where they do that, but then they're going to get back in their gym routine because they're going to lose too much of a foundation of fitness if they don't keep what we're actually conditioning there is our stabilizing muscle, our posterior muscle. We're keeping that strong because, with horses, building cardio is the easiest part. I feel like cardio is the thing that everybody wants to focus on, but then they kind of forget that you got to walk before you can run, and you have to build that stabilizing muscle before you can worry about the cardio.
Yeah, because it takes way more, like way less time to build your cardiovascular endurance versus like building your stabilizing muscles. I was actually just reading that earlier that it takes a lot more time. Like you can get cardiovascular just like that, but what you lack and how long it takes, because if you kick them out, and if you kick your horse out for more than 5 weeks, it's like you lose all this muscle tone. You lose literally everything, like you were saying. And then it's like, well, I'm going to go put my horse on the lunge line and lunge the crap out of them, get them all sweaty, and there's my workout. When that doesn't really happen, because like going into like the human side, like the athletes, they're not out there getting hot and sweaty. They might do Pilates, they might do yoga, they might do like flexibility training. And like if you're flexible, you're strong. That's what I've always heard. Like if you're flexible, and that kind of leads in with horses and their fascia, like when they're flexible, they're stronger. They have more glide in themselves and they can move a lot better.
Absolutely. And it helps protect your joints and things like that. But yeah, I think the statistic is, of course, we talk about this in the rehab program, that it is documentable on ultrasound on the 3rd or 4th day of stall rest, that you can actually have visible muscle atrophy on an ultrasound. And that also follows a human statistic of by the 3rd or 4th day of bed rest, muscle atrophy is detectable by ultrasound. And so, when we go back to that cardio, you can build cardio on a horse in about 2 weeks, about 14 days, if you have a good foundation of stabilizing muscle. And so when we have horses that don't have that posterior muscle built up, then we go and we're trying to just be like, all right, we've got this unfit horse, so we're just going to get on and just long trot the heck out of him. Well, what ends up happening is they have to get by on adrenaline. And so, as if I was going to pick up and carry a heavy box that was hard for me to carry, I'm going to carry it really, really fast where I'm going because I can use a little bit of adrenaline to push my body on through. That's where you get these like crazy acts of like superhuman strength when you're in a fight or flight mode, people pulling people out of car wreckage and that type of thing. It's because adrenaline will help carry the body through until it can, and going back to our box analogy. So if I was carrying a box that wasn't that heavy for me, that I was fit enough to pick this box up, okay, I may just leisurely carry that box over to where I'm going because my stabilizing muscle's strong. I don't feel like I have to hurry. I'm just going on at, carrying my box at a comfortable pace.
Mm-hmm.
And, the same can be said for our horses. When we are pushing them through and forcing them to do something that is outside of their physical capabilities, that fight or flight mechanism kicks in, and our sympathetic nervous system goes, oh wow, I got to do this thing. Like, all right, I'm going to hurry through it. I'm going to use some adrenaline. I'm going to surge some cortisol through the body. Like, we just got to get this done. And it makes it a lot harder to recover from that. So if we take the horse that's not fit and we just torture them in a round pen or on a walker or on a lunge line, and we exhaust that horse, it takes a lot longer for that horse to recover. So we don't end up stacking our workouts, where if we did less amount of time, like maybe the first time we get on our horse, maybe we only ride 10 minutes at a walk. Then maybe the next time that we get on, we can go 15 minutes, and then we just keep stacking on that. And then that is what creates a good workout plan. I think one thing to remember too is you cannot increase duration and intensity at the same time. So that means we've either got to set a goal to have a longer workout and then we start to add a more intense workout, or we do a super intense workout knowing that we're not going to be able to work out quite as long.
You took the words right out of my brain. Like, that was going to be my intensity and duration. You said, took it. And then once you start getting like and carrying through on your adrenaline, which I can relate it to human side. Literally yesterday, I had a migraine all day yesterday, and I had some appointments to go to, and I had horses to ride that morning. I had client horses to work. I had to get it all done before 10:45, mind you. Like, so I was like going, and I woke up with a migraine, and literally I ran all day yesterday on a migraine, but on adrenaline. Like, I had adrenaline. And that's what I kept telling everybody. I was like, I've got to go on adrenaline. Like, I got to keep my adrenaline up, because I was like, if I can keep pushing my body, and I'm paying for it today. I'm not gonna lie.
How tired are you today?
I'm exhausted. And I'm like, that's probably how these horses feel. And I don't, like, why would I want my horse to feel like that? Like, I wouldn't want Roxy to feel like that. And like, if Roxy felt like that, or Kitty, or whoever else, like, they could even start coming up with ulcers, because it's like their adrenaline's so high, they're so panicky. Like, we're up here, well, everything else decides to come up here and surface, and it's like, okay, then we risk having your ulcers. And that's not even like, at the show. You could, obviously ulcers.
Yeah, we haven't even made it to the show part.
No, we haven't. We're still in the preparation part. But when we have this really high adrenaline, we're going to increase the chance of ulcers and meet it there. And we're like, oh my gosh, like, why is my horse ulcery? And we're like 30 days away from a show, and it's like, you have chronic ulcers and your horse is cinchy and doing all the weird ulcery horse things. Mm-hmm. And you just are like trying to fight that, but also trying to get a workout in when you honestly, you can, but it's hard. You're kind of backtracking. It's like you give all this adrenaline, and then you really just, instead of building, you're like stepping backwards.
Absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about how nutrition plays into that, because nutrition does multiple things. One of them being, if we're not feeding the muscle, we can't build the muscle.
Right.
And then that also leads, I think, back into your ulcers, where if we don't have good feeding management, we have to figure out, if we have an ulcery horse, what is our root cause? Because ulcers are not going to be a primary problem. If we've got ulcers, we've got to figure out, is it a feeding management issue? Is it a pain issue? Is it an environmental issue? And we'll talk about that even more so as we work on through this. But that's one thing, a point that I really want to drive home, is people get a diagnosis of ulcers, or they have that horse scoped, and they think that when they treat the ulcers, all their problems go away. And yeah, it doesn't work that way, because that's not going to be a primary problem. That's going to be secondary. So you have to figure out what caused it.
Yeah. I'm a really big firm believer of the KISS method, of the keep it simple stupid. I'm not calling anybody stupid, but that's just what it's called, the KISS method. Um, because like the more you add to a horse's diet, the more likely that you are not meeting their needs, or you have met and over exceeded their needs. And there's no reason that you need to over exceed these horses' needs. Like I love nutrition. I love horse nutrition. I even love my nutrition, even though I'm really bad at my nutrition. I could probably be so much better, but I'm not. But I still love nutrition because I'm like, okay, if I'm fueling my body correctly, like I should be fueling my horse's body correctly. And that kind of goes in with ulcers. And I've been and heard everybody's like, which I think me and you need to do like a whole episode on nutrition because I'll tell you how I really feel.
No, I love it. We will schedule that and cover the Cliff Notes part of that today.
Yeah, because like it's such a hard topic for everyone, not just me, not just you, it's literally like everyone nutritionally wise. Like there's no reason we should overcomplicate a feeding program if it's coming from feeding. Now that like if we're talking like straight nutrition, like there's no reason to overcomplicate it. I don't think Fluffy needs 15 supplements because your feed should cover all of your calorie needs if you're feeding the correct feed and if you're meeting like what your horse needs, or if it's in light work, heavy work, medium work, or extra heavy work. There's like so many things and what your body condition score is. And it's like, okay, like, are we meeting these needs, but also like putting it in perspective of the workload that these horses are in and their body condition score, because that can also have a play on it. Your fat and sassy hippo out in the field that is perfectly fine that looks perfectly fine on the outside could on the inside have ulcers. Yes. I'm getting off topic. I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. Well, and to add on to that too, talking about functional muscle, like my big mare Glory, everybody always thinks she's more fit than what she is. And if you go out and look at her right now, she looks like something fit enough to go to a barrel race, but she just holds weight well. She's not a horse that really gets fat. She's a big, broad, wide mare. And so she gives you the illusion of like, oh yeah, she looks really, really fit. And that's where you have to assess that functional muscle, because it's like, no, she's not fit. Right now she's been on stall rest from surgery. So she's absolutely not fit. She's very much the opposite. But to the average person's eye, they would look at her and think that she was fit.
Yep. So I completely understand that. I've got two on like literally Roxy, who does not hold weight well, to Kitty, who holds weight so well. And like, I literally have to play with my feed, like poundages, because I'm like, okay, like Roxy, you don't look so great, but your functional muscle's there. And if I feed her too much, like, and she gets a little chunky, downhill. Like hers is very that, but Kitty, she's on the most basic, easiest feeding routine, because I'm like, I don't like to add too much. Like I want to meet their workload with, what their nutritional requirements need. So it's like their minerals and everything needs to be met. So like, I don't want to give them too much sugars and starches, but I don't want to give them too less, because once we give them too less of sugars and starches, that's where it's all like the muscles or the sugars and starches are harbored in your muscles. And so like when you don't have enough and you don't meet those requirements in your feeding program, that's when you start eating away at your muscle and you kind of lose all of your muscle tone.
For sure. And because even like PSSM horses, which I've had multiple of, they still have to have a little bit of starch and sugar just to function, especially from a performance.
It's got to replenish muscles. I mean, if you don't, then you're gonna have like no muscle, and you're not gonna be able to have those fast twitch and slow twitch muscles. And
because when we're talking about starch and sugars in like a horse perspective, if we are feeding a good feed, if we have a good feeding program, we're not feeding a lot of processed junk. So sometimes I think people misconstrued when we're talking about starch and sugar, and they want to compare that to like, okay, I'm going to grab a Snickers from the convenience store because I need a little bit of sugar. And it's like, okay, that's not the same, because there is so much filler junk in our diets. In my opinion, it's so much easier to control your horse's diet And that, like, to circle back to the supplement thing, I am not anti-supplement, but I always use this phrase. It's like, okay, when we think about the definition of supplement, it is to add to something that is deficient. Well, okay, if I have a complete feeding program, maybe I do want to add something for joints, because most of your feeding program, they're not going to have any added extra for joints. Maybe I want to add some vitamin E, maybe I want to add some magnesium, starting to supplement things that are deficient. I am a lot more pro supplement for people because we're emotional eaters, we're stress eaters, we're boredom eaters, where I want to go have queso with my friends eaters. And we have a lot more access to things that are bad for us. Man, I'm driving out to your house and I'm tired. Like, I got 5 more hours on this trip to go. Like, the temptation to grab an energy drink or coffee is right there every time I get fuel. And if I'm tired enough, I'm going to cave to that. Where with our horses, we're providing all of their needs, and their needs are met. I know the second that I get that coffee, I'm like, well, good thing I take an adrenal supplement, because my body's got to borrow the energy from somewhere, and it's going to be my adrenals. But I got to get on to Jordan's house because I'm on a schedule, or I've got to get through my day at the barn because I'm on a schedule. And so that's where, to me, supplementation with people, I'm a lot more pro of. But at the same time, you have to be able to break those supplements down. If I take a handful of vitamins and it's too much on my stomach's going to get queasy, and I'm going to go, I better separate these up, because that was too much for my digestive system. When we throw in 5 or 6 or 12 supplements in a feeding on a horse, we don't have that feedback unless they get ulcery. And chances are, if they get ulcery because you're feeding them too many supplements, the average owner won't pick up on that. And then they'll throw 3 more digestive supplements in there. And they're just keeping that sea of fire fueled. Because if you've ever
Even
done
if
that,
they're
like if you've ever taken a handful of vitamins, or especially strong, really strong quality vitamins on an empty stomach, it will flip the stomach a lot of times, because it's really hard for the body to break down powders and vitamins when you take a whole lot at once.
Yep. And then you put, say, like you were saying, an extra like gut supplement. Mm-hmm. And that even goes with like starting this like before shows. Like, I know a lot of people, they'll like up their supplements before a big show. And it's like, well, they're just getting the extra, but why are you giving them the extra? Like,
do they really need that extra?
Yeah. And it's like, no, like most of the time I'm like, no, I'm saying no, these horses don't. But to the average horse owner, they're like, well, we've got to do everything we can to get Fluffy ready. And I'm like, if you just follow the protocol, which I know it's hard and it's time sensitive, like, I get it, life gets in the way 110%. Like, a normal average person has a 9-to-5 job. Once they get off at 5 o'clock, they're tired, they're worn out, they're mentally drained from whatever they've had to do at work. And then they're like, well, do I really like want to go ride my horse? Do I really want to go exercise my horse? Like, why can't I just go like run in a circle a few times and be done? But back to nutritional, it's like, you don't have to overcomplicate your supplements, because like you were saying, like, you're setting that fire. You are Absolutely. Igniting that fire and continuing to put like more gasoline on that fire when there's no need for it. And then you add in a gut supplement, whether that's a liquid form, powder, pelleted, whatever it is, if it actually works or if it's actually helping. Because I know, like, one little syringe or pump or scoop or whatever isn't going to fix that horse's gut or subside it.
A lot of times it's feeding management,
Yeah.
or poor fitting tack. Like, again, no matter, like you said, we could have a whole podcast just on this topic alone, but at the root of it, you have to figure out, why do you have the digestive issues? And talking about upping things before a show or at a show. Now, I do like to, I will alter the amount of feed, the poundage of feed that I'm giving. A lot of times too, it's because, like, when I lived in Oklahoma, my horses were out on pasture. Well, if we're at a show for a week, there's no pasture there. They're surviving just on the hay, and in that case, I might add a little extra feed in there when we're at the show, just to kind of up that calorie content, and make sure that we're our needs are met. It's not uncommon for me to give a little extra snack of feed. Like when I would go out and trail ride, before Glory had her surgery, I mean, I was going out and spending 6 and 7 hours on trails, traveling about 10 miles. There's a loop in Sedona I like to make that it's just under 10 miles, and it is hard, rough trails. Like I spent 3 months of riding easier trails before I got to transition her to those. And when I'd get back, like, she had her hay and everything because we don't have pasture here in Arizona. So, I would dump her a little extra snack of feed at the end of the day because, she's getting depleted a lot. Plus, she's off of hay for that whole 7 hours that I'm riding, because it's not like I'm carrying it along with me,
Yeah,
and
they do make treats now. Purina does, which is totally off topic, but they're like gastric support treats, and they have like a little bit, like it's Outlast, and it's supposed to have like some type of like protein or in it, or it has like they have Replenimash. It's like electrolytes, but it's something to help coat the stomach and like keep that palate. So like if you're on like a long trail ride or a long haul, like if you're hauling, say from Kentucky to Oklahoma, that's a 12-hour. That's right. A 12-hour ride. That's something like we give Roxy. Like we make sure like not only she has like alfalfa in the manger, but like we give her a little like Replenimash, like which I know like on a trail, but this is something you can pack. If you've got like a little
something you can put in your saddlebags.
Yeah, like you can put like a little baggie. You can get a gallon baggie and it'll like wrap down, and you can put your like Outlast, because your Replenimash you have to make wet, but your like the little Outlast treats or like the little Outlast pellets, you can put like servings in a gallon bag and just hand feed them. Most of the time, these horses are going to eat it. And it puts like a layer. It's like a gastric buffer. It puts a layer on their stomach, and it's like, yeah, we're like out riding, and it kind of gives them like a little bit of energy. So I think it might have some protein in it. I don't know. I'll have to fact check myself. I don't know.
Well, and I think it's worth mentioning too, like there's a difference in a horse that like she enjoys being out on the trails. She's relaxed. Of course, she does like try to eat stuff on the trails. I'm like, okay, I don't know all the plants out here. Like, I don't know. Like, I know that is not Bermuda. Like, should you be eating that? She's like me. Like, I love to hike and eat at the same time. And she's like, like just trying to like grab anything as we're going. But I think that it's worth mentioning too, the stress level has to do with, how much that digestion is affected when they can't have hay in front of them. If she's happy, excited, like, yeah, I'm not going to stop that acid from being produced and moving through the body because that's how their system works. But she's going to come home and not have digestive upset like a horse that has been tied to a trailer for 7 hours that is pawing and stressing and upset. That horse is going to have a much more likely chance of having digestive upset from being without hay than a horse that's out there living their best life and, riding across the river like we do on some of these trails where she's got access to water. Like there's a big difference in the stress level and how that affects the body.
110%.
So that being said, let's kind of transition on to, we're still in that preparation topic. But like, things that come to mind for me is, has your horse been stalled before? Like circling back to our big show here. I used to haul horses and, I might take something that I was only exhibitioning and find a barrel race and take them and just stall them. I feel like you are really setting yourself up for defeat and failure if the first time that horse is going to be stalled overnight or multiple nights in a row is at the big show that you're at. We want to haul them. We want to have those horses exposed to different factors and things at shows before we get to that big show, because you may go to a jackpot where they don't even have music playing. And so, if we can start having those horses stalled a little bit at our house, like teaching them it's okay to be confined. That being said, I much prefer my horses turned out in pasture, but you have to prepare them mentally and physically for the show that you're going to.
Yep. And I'm lucky to have like my barn where I have a lot of horses coming in and out. But like if I have a stall open, I like to bring my young one up here. I like to bring my 4-year-old up here and put her in a stall next to somebody new. Because I'm like, you're gonna be hauled. And my iPad's actually propped up on my big speaker. And so like I sing, I dance, I like have the thing blaring through the barn, sometimes sitting right in front of the young one's stall because I'm just like, you know what? I want a broke horse. And she's good.
Absolutely.
And I mean, I have my trailer backed up kind of at my barn. And so like I'll take her out there and stand her tied. I'll walk horses by her. Like I make sure like if we're at a horse show, that's kind of like the horse show atmosphere. And here it's kind of like overnight. Like I'm not gonna leave her in there all day, but she'll get to like overnight in a stall next to another horse. And I'm just like, I'm very lucky to be able to have that. I feel like, because I'm just like, I can be able to set mine up for success. And like, maybe if you don't have that, if you just have a pasture with a little run in, close that run in off and like feed your horse in there. Because I know it's hard for some people. And like, it's like, oh, well, I don't have like a big, nice barn. I just have turnouts, or I don't have a stall, or like just build you a little, like a little like paneled pen and like keep the horse in there and, you know, maybe put a tarp over it or do some, I don't know, I'm just trying to think like budget friendly. Like if you don't have like the luxury of like a rehab barn where you can stall your own horse, or you don't have a barn. And that way
I had run-in sheds, like the loafing sheds, and we would just build panel pens there.
Yeah, all you gotta do is just like cut it off
before I had the rehab barn. Yeah, and it's just teaching them that it's okay to be confined, because I've seen horses go to shows and they refuse to lay down because they don't have enough spatial awareness. Like they don't know that they can lay down and get back up. And so, you know, if we can start that process of teaching them that ahead of time, before we get there, we're not going to end up with a sleep deprived horse
or a cast horse. My young likes to get cast because she's a big girl. Like she's big as a 4-year-old. Like she's big, and she just likes to lay down and fill all the shavings. Well, homegirl gets cast, and I'm just like, and she lays there like a good girl. Like there's
the thing is, you're tackling that now instead of waiting until she's seasoned and you're somewhere like the Pink Buckle, where that's the last place you want something like that to happen.
That would be really bad. And thankfully, well, not thankfully, it sucks because she's not enrolled in Pink Buckle, even though I should have. She's not enrolled, but I wish. But she will be going to a lot of other shows.
There you go.
She'll be coming to a lot of other shows.
Well, and like another topic, like talking about preparation that like I want to touch on is, I saw a post that went viral on social media where they were talking about not riding your horse across concrete, getting off and leading your horse across the concrete. I didn't engage on that on there, because I have a little different perspective of it. Okay, my thing is, I want to create a horse that is safe enough. Like in most circumstances, would I get off and walk across the concrete? Sure, probably. Yep. But I want to have a horse that has enough training and has enough confidence that if I decide to go and ride on that concrete, that they will. You know, I love taking young horses to, well, I just like parades in general. Like when we get back out here for December, like you bet they have a Christmas light parade where we can ride the horses in it, and you bet my horse is going to be going down the Christmas light with all the floats and things.
Yes,
because that's stuff I like to do. But circling back to why that's important, I used to have a flat stretch of road that was, you know, not a very heavy traffic road there in Anadarko, that I would go out and I would ride up and down the road and on my young horses, and I might weave through the dotted line on it. I might ride them across where they had to look down and see that dotted line. You know, and my thought process was pretty simple. It's like, I don't want my colt to make a fool out of me in front of like God and everybody at the barrel race. And I really don't want to die today. Like I'm not trying to die at the Oklahoma City Fairgrounds. And so, you know, my thought process was, instead of avoiding that, let's teach our horses how to handle it and be confident before we go to town.
Hmm.
And it also pays off because, okay, I'm going to use the Fort Worth rodeo arena for example. You don't have time to get off and ride your horse down the concrete aisle and then get on in the holding pen to go down the alley to run the pro rodeo. So if you can't ride your horse across the concrete, I mean, think of how many pictures we see of our NFR girls sitting on horses or riding across concrete, going in and out of the tunnels. It is really hard to avoid if your goal is to compete at that level. It is really hard to avoid the training that is required to get that horse prepared to be at that level if you're going to avoid concrete.
Even
Now,
at the American or Rodeo Houston, like a lot of their pictures, like they're out there walking, like those cool TikTok videos that everybody sees, like
mm-hmm,
they're out there like slow mowing on the concrete or the blacktop. And I mean, yeah, like to some that's dangerous. And I mean, that's what I do with Roxy to even like prep her. I did well, I was doing 75 hard this time last year. And to like prep Roxy, I like for the pink buckle, I was taking her because I had to do an outside workout. Like I would take her with her lead rope because I knew she was smart enough to do it. But if I needed to do it like of a morning or something and I didn't like want to ride and I was just doing like my corrective exercises and stretching, kind of having like a rest movement day,
mm-hmm.
she would go run with me. Like I would jog and she would trot because like you had that stretch. I have a good stretch of road that's not that busy, but it's got curves. It's got different colored blacktop, and it also has hills. So
Mm-hmm.
like I would jog, she would trot, and we would do that on a flat, and she would have to go up and down these hills and also engage her body to actually like work on blacktop
For sure.
and
And I
like
don't
build
and I
up
don't think there's anything wrong with that in short spurts.
yeah.
So that's a topic that I've always wanted to cover. And to be honest, I just haven't been brave enough to cover it on social media because I feel like somebody's going to take that and go the complete wrong direction with it.
Yeah.
But
I'm sure
I
that what I just said.
no, but like this leads into that. So like I used to jog and trot down that flat stretch of blacktop in front of the house. Now again, I'm not doing that for miles. I'm doing it for a short spurt there. And what I was listening for is the footfalls.
Yeah.
There is nothing that makes you more confident before you leave out to go on a string of rodeos than to do a light trot down that blacktop and hear every footfall be perfect. And in my opinion, it's no different than your vet trotting your horse on concrete. What are they looking for? They are looking for pain in the joints that causes a head bob. They're looking for on a graded scale of lameness 0 to 5. How lame is this horse? And so, that was one thing that I would do. Now, like riding long distances on the concrete, I'm not going to do, I don't want to be riding a mile on the blacktop by any means, but in most of the time, I'm going to do that at a walk because I'm looking to build that bone density. But there's nothing, in my opinion and in my experience, I have not had any adverse effects of just jogging, doing a light jog for a short distance to assess where my horse is.
And honestly, that helped a lot with like Roxy's like hoof growth. We all know Roxy has really bad feet. Because rest in peace to a legend. Streaker died, but she was not blessed with like perfect feet that I would call like perfect. Like we've had to do a lot of like corrections for her to make her continue on happy and sound. But whenever I was trotting her, and like whenever I do, like we'll kind of the short bursts, like trotting, I'm not on her, I'm like leading her. Like it would help her hoof growth. And I guess it would just hit just right. It would hit the central sulcus, but and I don't know. I was just like happy for her foot growth because she doesn't have a lot of that. But that helped her a lot was for her foot to grow with that. And I mean, that even goes back to her nutrition. We had her on a good nutrition program, still do. So, I mean, it all kind of, everything's connected. Everything plays a role together.
For sure. And I think it's one of those things that, again, it's important to circle back and go everything in moderation. because
Yes.
that's the whole reason I've never made a post on that topic, because I'm like, good Lord, somebody be on Facebook going, oh yeah, Summer said that she long trots her horse for a mile on the concrete. I'm like, that's not what I said.
It's
But
taken out, people take it out a lot of context. So like I understand. Like everything is good in moderation. It's like we were talking about books. The nutritional thing, it's good in moderation. Like taking all those supplements. Everything is good in moderation.
mhm. Well, and I'll
100%.
also add in another little story. Like I remember when we first went up to teach with the Amish, and we walked out at that rehab, and you were like panicked because you're like, oh my gosh, their walker is concreted. And I'm like, yeah, but these are buggy horses that have to be able to go up and down the concrete pulling a buggy, because that's what they're used for. So, it would make sense for their walker to be on concrete, because they are working on building that bone density so that those horses can safely transport families to and from work, to and from school.
Yeah, and
But
now
would it
like
be advantageous for us to have a concrete walker for our barrel horses? Absolutely, it would not. But I could see their thought process on it, and it made perfect sense.
yeah, and I mean living around like an Amish community, like because there's a lot of Amish here in Barron County, and surrounding counties. We have a lot of Amish here, and now like I think back on the experiences that like I got to have, because like growing up, I was like, oh, these poor horses, like they're carrying these families, and I'm like, oh no. And now I'm like, wait, we went to Shipshawana, and now everything like makes sense. Like I'm like, oh, this is like why they do it. Like they have to train these horses. It's no different than us training our barrel horses. Our crazy barrel horses have a specific training, just like these buggy horses have a specific training. And like their concreted walker, that's
Mm-hmm.
their training process, or their different training processes with their buggies that they have to do. Like there's a whole reason, and their rehab was like the same but almost different in a sense,
For
because
sure.
they had to have the same preparation to go say here, and what normally would take us 3 hours in a car is going to take them days to get there. Actually,
Right.
I don't know the math, so I'm just coming out of my
Well,
head.
and in that sense, a lot of them have drivers too, so that they don't
Yeah.
exhaust those horses. Most of the time, their horses anymore are used for short trips, like to and from town. So but there's a lot of standing involved on the concrete and things like that.
Or
It
standing at the Dollar General down the road.
absolutely. And I guess like one more thing to add on to this topic before we move on to our next one is, working in different types of ground. That's where we get into working our horses in varied terrain. I would not take a horse I would not ride one up and down the road that I had not first ridden on hard packed dirt. I would not start with riding one up and down asphalt. I would start with, riding on regular soft ground. And then, if you want to add resistance, then you could do a workout in sand, because sand adds about 50% resistance to your workout. But then you also want to transition into riding on dirt that's like a hard pan, or, sometimes our grass gets pretty hard in a drought year in Oklahoma.
It's hard
And
here too, so be ready for that when you come out here.
yeah, and definitely I would not, um, I would not transition something to something drastic like asphalt if I hadn't worked up to that. So I want to add that little note in there before we move on.
Right. I will add that I do not just go straight to the asphalt. I don't want anybody taking that out of context, that I just like go straight to the asphalt. No, I worked my way up. I don't want anybody to think that.
Well, and that's where it's like the explanation, because again, social
Yeah.
media, it's like they take something and it's like we just take it to the 100th degree, and it's like, okay, that's not exactly what I meant.
I know, and then somebody will be like, well, Jordan said this on this podcast, and I'll be like,
a little
well,
clarification goes a long way.
Like she went from here, like we had steps, we had a process. And I was like, I didn't just do it.
But I also feel like that's why we educate, because there are a lot of vague statements just thrown out there on social media, like, well, I do this. I do this with all my horses. Well, okay, then the person that comes in, they're like, okay, I want to do that too. They don't know the steps that had made it up to that. And so, again, the big takeaway from this section is in preparation is making sure our horse is fit, making sure their nutritional needs are met, and creating confidence. Creating confidence of, turn your speakers up, have some music on. Let's prepare that horse the best that we can before we get to the race that we need them to succeed at.
Yep.
And another thing, like I'll even add on there, because we're going to transition into trailering, like some trailering tips next. I always practice long trailer rides with my horses. I would not load up and drive 7 hours to a barrel race if a horse had only ever been an hour from home, because what you're gonna the AAEP released a statistic that 3 hours of riding in a trailer is the equivalent of galloping a mile at that same intensity. And and then you post a statistic like that, and everybody on social media wants to argue with you and go, oh, well, I have an air ride floor, I have this, or I have that. Okay, good quality trailers help, but what that statistic is based on is the stabilizing muscle of that horse being able to stand up in the motion of that trailer. It has nothing to do with the quality of your trailer, although that being said, we do know there are different qualities of trailers. But I noticed a big difference from my horses not being fit when I moved them out here to Arizona and how hard that trip was on them versus going back and forth when I've been riding and trail riding a bunch. The trip was a lot easier for them. And so practice long trailer rides. And I'll have people ask me like, oh, well, are you trying to say hauling my horse in the trailer will make my horse fit? Well, no, it's not going to be a replacement for riding, but does it have a fitness aspect to it? Absolutely it does. If you don't think it does, you stand in there and don't hold on to the sides and see how much you balance. That's where vibration plates and stuff come in really handy, is we can build that stabilizing muscle. We can start that process there with equipment like that. But there's something to be said for just loading them up and hauling them in the trailer. Like I'm going to put Glory on the trailer and haul her a bit before we just take off to Oklahoma, because I want to make sure that her stifle is not going to aggravate her, because that will tell me, okay, here's what I need to prepare for starting to head back east with her.
I mean, that even kind of like goes in to like really like having like what type of flooring. I know a lot of people like want to say, oh, well, I'm going to put, because you're talking about the air ride trailers. It's like, well, I want to put knee deep shavings in there. But it's like, okay, but if you actually look where your horse stands, they either like might clear out the spot in the front and literally stand on the mats anyway. So it's like you kind of wasted your shavings. And then where does all those shavings go? It moves back. And they might even be like standing up on the shavings and have their feet dug into the shavings. And it's right. Like, okay, like they're trying to like stabilize there, because I know like I don't put a whole lot of shavings in our trailers, and we just kind of use the mat. But I kind of had practiced and trained my horse and got her ready to do that. You can ask Jackson and Sydney. They've been in the trailer while I drove, because I was like, get in, let's do it. And I know you have a video on that as well. But I had them do it, and they were like, this is hard. And like Sydney rode back there with Jackson, because Sydney had done that before, but Jackson never had. Coming from a non-horse background right. to marrying the crazy horse girl. And he was like, that's actually really hard. He was like, I had to use muscles I didn't even know I had to be able to stand up in the back of that trailer. And he said, we didn't even go that far. We went from the indoor arena up to my facility. That's how far we went. He said, oh my gosh. He said, I couldn't do it. He's
my grandpa always had a rule that before you got to pull the horse trailer, you had to ride in the horse trailer.
Yep.
And now that being said, I feel like when you got the introduction to riding in the horse trailer, I'm like, you are taking curves way faster than you ever would with a horse. Like it's kind of like, oh yeah, throw all the kids in there and like, put the pedal on the floor, because I'm like, you are not driving this reckless with horses. But
No.
I think it's important to drive that point home. And, again, yes, we know it's illegal to ride in the trailer, et cetera, et cetera. But the thing is, I want to know how my horse feels in there. And
Yeah.
like I downgraded when I sold my living quarters. I sold my living quarters, sold the trailer that we had, that we pulled the client horses in there at Guthrie because it had a bent axle and I didn't want to have it fixed, and I didn't want it going back and forth from Arizona to Oklahoma. So we sold that trailer fairly cheap. And so right now what I have is just a stock combo trailer. And the reason that I chose that trailer was because one thing I learned with Glory was she has trouble riding in a slant. When we talk about the development of slant trailers, they didn't design those for the good of the horse. They designed those for trainers that needed to haul multiple horses at one time. Like those are designed for our convenience, not so much the horse. And it's being able to cram a whole bunch of horses in a trailer and take off and go down the road with it. With her having stifle issues, she would step back and just work her hind feet on my mats, and would actually tear the mats down off the back of the tear the rubber off the back of the trailer. Wasn't because she was a kicker, wasn't because she was trying to be bad. It was she had trouble balancing with her stifles. Her stifles have bothered her for so long. And so that was one thing I started watching for is, when even a horse is coming in the rehab, when they come off that trailer and they have a gray mark on their side where I know that they have leaned and balanced on that divider, I know that I either have a weak horse or I have a horse that's got an issue. And so, those were some of the things that when we didn't take horses, we would mark that down and call it out to the owner, like, hey, do you realize that he's, ridden on this divider the whole way here? And so then when I sold my living quarters, I transitioned into, I had a straight load. And so she was better with the straight load, but she would still get sore in there. So now going to a stock combo like I have, she has a box stall. So, and I watch her in my mirror. I can tell which direction she's turned. And she turns and rides one way for a while, turns and rides the other way for a while. Sometimes she rides forward, sometimes she rides backwards. Every time I stop to get fuel, she can make a complete circle in there because she has tons of room. And actually she prefers that. And I learned about hauling horses open in a trailer with my first little weekend package living quarters that I had when I had my PSSM horse. He'd tie up in a divider. Like he did not do well with it. He had a stifle surgery early in his career. Now looking back, I think there was some NPA going on and there were some other things besides just PSSM, but this is back when I was in high school and sure didn't have the skill set I have now. But how I got around that with him was I had this sundowner trailer that was a little bit narrow, and I removed a divider so that he could turn around and ride whichever way that he wanted. And actually, he was one that had he was kind of a silly horse anyway. And like, in the same way a dog likes going in their crate, he loved his trailer. And he might be laying down in there just chilling, like you'd come out from eating at a restaurant. Like if you stop, and he might just be big chilling in the floor of the trailer. And then when you get ready to go, he'd stand back up and away we'd go. And I rodeoed on him many, many years hauling him that way. Of course, I only had one horse, so I could open that trailer up and let him balance where he wanted to. And that helped him a lot. So those are just the things that like I always pay attention to with my horses going down the road is how do they really ride in there? And of course, now you can have cameras and all kinds of stuff that we didn't have access to years ago that are extremely helpful.
I lost my train of thought. I'm not gonna lie.
All right. And okay, so let's talk a little bit about Roxy. Like, what do you observe about her in the trailer? For those that haven't followed the story of her or that are maybe new to this podcast, she's had stifle surgery as well as kissing spine surgery. So, how does she ride compared to maybe some of your horses that haven't had as many issues?
So Roxy's a lot different, and I've remembered my train of thought now that you brought Roxy up. But Roxy, it depends on where she's at, depends on what trailer she's at, because all of our trailers are slant loads. We have one stock trailer that is our like runaround trailer, but she normally likes to sit because we haul 3 horses. One's by himself because he cannot be with the other 2 mares, aka Devil. He does not like the other mares, and the mares don't like him. But she rides on the very back. I won't put her up front, and I won't like smash her where the divider is, and I won't put Tiny next to her. So that's our runaround trailer. But she likes to be on the end so she can sit on the door. So I mean, she's had those stifle issues, and we've kind of like we've not nipped it in the bud, but we have figured out ways around that. And no matter what, she's gonna lay on that door or that divider. When we go to Pink Buckle in our big living quarters trailer, or when we haul to any of like our bigger shows, which we haven't been to just because I've not been able to go anywhere because of the barn.
Welcome to owning a facility.
Yeah, I don't go
You have to
anywhere.
pass
Like,
the torch to you.
I know, and I'm like, I do not go anywhere. I have 2 big shows that I'm going to, and that's literally NBHA State Show and Pink Buckle. That's it. And I go to like jackpots that are right down the road. But in the big trailer, she will like switch side to side because we put her in the middle. We've got the front slant with everything packed in there, the back slant open, and she stands in the middle slant. But it's easy enough to where she can rock back and forth, or she can kind of get comfortable anyway. I tie my horses in the trailer, and I know that's kind of where you and I are different. But I haul more than 2 normally, and if we go to Pink Buckle, she just has to get tied.
I think it depends on the horse. You know,
Yeah.
I'm not really pro or con completely. You know, things to think about when we have their heads tied or when we have mangers in there. You know, if that horse needs to like expel something out of their lungs, you know, sometimes they can't get their head down. You know, think about it. If you have your head up and you try to cough, you're only going to be able to clear right here. You know, what do we do when we cough? We usually bend down. You know, you're going to cough forward because that helps to expel things out of the lungs. So, you know, sometimes when you're tying them, you do, especially if you're feeding hay going down the road or cubes or feed, or, you know, if you have anything in your manger in a hay bag, you do run a little more of a risk of choke and things like that if they are tied. But that being said, I got my stud in a really, really bad wreck. When he was younger, we had a horse of my grandma's that was really mischievous, and he was kind of one of that, and we always tied him because he would aggravate everything. And I had my stud up in the front stall and didn't have this other gelding tied, and he sat and chewed on my stud my stud was probably 2 or 3 at the time. I think he was probably 2. The entire way of the barrel race, I got there and he had bite marks all on his withers, had bite marks on his legs. And I didn't know because he was not aggressive enough. Like there was no fight in the trailer or anything back and forth. Like he just stood there and took it because I had him tied and we accidentally didn't get this other gelding tied. And of course, my stud was not a very aggressive horse anyway. Like he was always the low guy on the totem pole his whole life. So, you know, I don't know that he would have retaliated even if he wouldn't have been tied. And, you know, that was one of those where it's just like, okay, we can never make this mistake again because I got there and I couldn't even saddle him because I had all these big bite marks and, you know, I was ready to murder and barbecue my grandma's horse. After that, I was just like, this sorry sucker. You know, so I think that there is instances, you know, especially when you're hauling multiple horses where tying them is necessary.
And that's kind of like what we do is we tie them and kind of go on with it. But that even kind of goes on to saying, like, kind of like backtracking a little bit. I rode 2 hours in a trailer to Rood and Riddle from here with a mare that was tying up. And so like going back to that, like it's hard, like trying to like pull yourself, because I sit down because we had to get on the interstate. Like I had to make sure I was the only one to get back there and able to give meds because like I didn't want my Nana back there. I didn't want my Poppy back there. And it was me back there riding. And I had to make sure like she was okay, but it's hard. It is hard to like move in that trailer when you were going. He probably wasn't going 80 miles an hour. It felt like we were going 80 miles an hour. My Poppy probably went the speed limit, but it's hard to like use all the muscles and like pull myself up, because I would sit down and I would just barely pop up. And then even it's like hard on these horses, like when you're stopping and starting, like I was falling down even riding. That was my train of thought that I lost. This was my train.
Yeah. Well, and like another thing to add on the tying too is, you know, like an instance where I would choose to tie a horse, like with our straight load trailer, I had to tie them there. Now I had them tied long enough that if they needed to get their head down and cough, that they could. But with my straight load, I just had the open area because it was one of the Sundowner goosenecks. So I had escape doors where you could walk into the front. And I had to watch because those horses would duck behind that bar and put their head down. So in the event there, I didn't want their head down and me have to slam on the brakes and end up with a broken neck or something. Same thing with mangers. If you have a horse that doesn't keep their head up naturally and they want to get behind and be behind that manger, I don't want that. I don't want to risk breaking a neck on a horse. So it's like that would be one that I would tie. Where I have the box stall with Glory, I kind of just let her, I take my lead rope and everything off and just leave her halter on and let her move around at will. And that was also something like, again, I discussed with my vet. When I decided to go to a box stall, I talked about it with my vet and I said, I know I got to be a little more careful because she is loose in there. And he's like, yeah, but she's big enough, like she's going to squat in a corner, squat on a door if you're having to get on the brakes. Like he's like, she's smart enough to pay attention.
Yeah, and there's some horses that aren't. Roxy would not be one that would be smart enough. She's a very smart barrel pony, but she's not smart enough to do that. She would not be. She'd be like, what am I doing? And just, there she goes.
Yeah, so I think you have to make that decision. I don't think that there's a one size fits all answer to that. I think it's something that you have to pro and con with each individual horse.
Speaking of horse, he was feeling left out that we were talking about another horse. He just needed some attention. But that kind of even goes in with like fly mask, because like we were talking about shavings in the trailer, I feel like, and then like them being loose in there. So like, like fly mask, no fly mask, like what is your risk? What is your reward here? Because sometimes like, I feel like if you have a fly mask on, like, yes, the horses can see out of it, but I'm also like, sometimes I feel like, because I put a fly mask on my head because I'm like, well, if the horses are going to wear it, I'm going to see what I can see out of it. And they can't really see all that much. So it's like,
that's why it says on there, you shouldn't leave them on at night. Now, yeah, I know a lot of times we do. I don't take it off every night because sometimes the flies are still bad up in the paddocks. Here in Arizona, they don't hold a candle to flies in Oklahoma. Like, holy smokes! But
you've seen the flies,
we don't have bugs in general out here like we have in Oklahoma. But if the flies are still bothersome, I leave it on at night. But it reduces their vision
a lot, and it's like your risk you're taking, like, and it can get hung on anything in the trailer. Like that's like, and I do it because I'm like, I don't want anything in their eyeballs.
See, I do too. I'm a fly mask in the trailer person.
I am too.
And the thing is, you can't
some people aren't.
No. Pat and I, my goodness, I don't even think we were married. I think we were still dating. And we went to Shawnee to a barrel race. And I think it was the first barrel race that he went to with me. And we were on our way back and I was getting on an on-ramp and I had somebody cut me off and lock up and I kind of had to lock my brakes up a little bit. And I don't know what Glory caught, but she hit her eye either on, this is when I still had my slant load because we were in the living quarters trailer at that point, but she caught something right on that window that came down. And in that case, I did not have a fly mask on her because I was close to home. I'm like, yeah, I'll just throw her in there. And she has a little bit of a spot left over from an ulcer that we doctored. Eye injuries are hard. And I swear to goodness, I have had brood mares that I couldn't keep a fly mask on, couldn't keep them out of the sun, maybe couldn't catch them to even get antibiotic cream in there, and they will heal up just fine. And then you have like a performance horse where you keep them out of the sun, you keep the fly mat, you do everything, and they'll still end up with a spot in that eye. Like
Yep.
eyes are just hard. So the more that you can prevent, the better. But to go back to what you were saying, I have also seen shavings get up in those fly masks and get underneath them. I've also seen pieces of hay come through
True.
the fly mask as well. So I mean, it's not a foolproof thing.
No, and I've even had like my horses and some of the horses we have here with names not being said. Devil, I'm saying his name, and the broken splint bone Zed. So Sydney, if you listen to this, Zed literally like these boys, the geldings on the property. Let's just put it that way. They like if they're out in the pasture, like they've gotten stuff like stuff. It's not in their nose, but it's like if this is like their fly mask, it's literally like wood, like where they like get on the post and start rubbing, and they get it down in there. And I'm like, I'm glad they had the fly mask on, because if this was like their normal face, like that would be stuck down in there.
Yeah.
And I'm like, scary, scary, scary. And I'm like, I tell all the client horses, I'm like, please don't do this. This is a bad example. Do not follow this example, these boys' examples.
Right.
Because I'm just like, anything can happen. And I mean, Roxy, bless her heart, I mean, she's ran into things because of her fly mask. My 4-year-old has run into things because of her fly mask. And I'm just like, man, I'm like, and I don't leave them on at night because like the flies die down here. But today they are not, as you can tell throughout this whole podcast. They just like are kind of crazy. Like they get really bad, but at night they've been better. But I'm just like, it's broad daylight and you're running into things.
Right.
I was like, goodness, and things get caught. I don't know. It worries me. And I mean, I still do it. I mean, even the pink buckle, I'm sure I'll, get her put her fly mask on, because I'll have loose alfalfa in the manger.
Well, and I think again, everything, the big takeaway is most of what we're going to talk about is situational. You have to know your horse, and you have to know your horse's needs. If I have one that is consistently taking a fly mask off, maybe that's a horse that's just not going to handle one. I'm a person that you won't see me wear sunglasses very often, because I don't like stuff sitting on the bridge of my nose. And that's just, they're always in my way, and I don't like them. And so, personal preference, I feel like we need to honor the preference of our horse, find something that works for that individual. And like, I want to talk one last thing on, well, two things on the trailer before we move on. So I'm going to read a little bit of a statistic here that I pulled out of one of my fitness books, and talking about keeping horses drinking while you're hauling, whether you like to use paced electrolytes, whether you like to use the electrolyte strips like you see me using. A loss of only 8% of the body's water can cause illness, and a loss of 15% can cause dehydration, heat stroke in competing horses. So when we think about how quickly horses get dehydrated, I was also reading another statistic where they talked about a horse could lose 5% or more of their body weight in a duration of a trailer ride that's 8 to 10 hours. So when we're talking about a 1,000-pound horse, that's 50 pounds of weight coming off of that horse. That's where you see these horror stories of a horse gets off of a shipping truck and the weight is just falling off of them. Well, where that weight is going is the water. They are dehydrated and have not been adequately supplemented with correct hydration. And so, thinking about that, hauling into a show, when, if we start out our show with a dehydrated horse, it's only going to get worse with performance. And so, we've got to keep those horses drinking. Glory's not a good drinker on the road. And I think part of her issue has always been that her stifles are bothersome. And, when you have a tight ventral line, if you're tight and contracted, you don't really want to drink a whole bunch. And so that's where, the electrolyte strips that I've used, they've been a game changer for her. But, that's something to keep in mind. And then also the topic of wrapping legs. I get asked all the time. People asking you, do I wrap legs? I think it depends on the horse. If you have an English horse that is used to being in standing bandages all the time, they're going to transition to them in the trailer fairly easily. I would not, in my opinion, take a horse that has never been wrapped and decide, oh, I'm going to wrap today and then throw him on the trailer and haul several hours to a barrel race. I also would not take a horse that has never had legs wrapped and decide I'm going to wrap him for the whole week at a barrel race, because our whole thing is we want to create balance and stability while we're at that race. So throwing a whole bunch of new things that they're not used to at them is not helpful.
Right. And that even kind of leads into like ceramics and magnet sheets and like compression boots and wrapping those legs or taping their legs. I like to tape legs because there's nothing on there if your horse has been previously taped. But I would.
You're talking about the kinesiology taping.
The kinesiology taping, yes. But like, I'm not gonna go take a young or any type of horse and just like, oh, we're hauling to Perry, Georgia, or we're hauling to the Pink Buckle, and I'm like, okay, I'm not gonna throw one on that's never been wrapped because like that's gonna freak them out. Like honestly, like I know how they duck walk, flamingo walk, whatever walk you want to call it, because like that could also stress them out. And what is that back? Basically, circle back up to ulcers, stress, and there's no reason to do that. Like I don't think putting a like a ceramic sheet or a magnetic sheet on during the trailer ride, because you get a lot of heat in that trailer anyways. Now I can understand like some when it's cold, like colder, but like in the summer heat, like there's no reason to put a magnetic sheet on your horse. And then like even though it's breathable, but like you're just still conducting heat, even though it's breathable, you still have that mesh on, and it's like, we still kind of have a sweaty horse under there. But that's just really my opinion.
Or well, and I think too, you know, you can check your horse, like when you pull off for fuel, if that horse has sweat underneath what you've got on, it might be time for it to come off.
But a lot of people don't. Like the average horse owner, they're like, oh, I'm gonna look through the little pull down window and be like, oh, hey, are you okay? You're not broken. Throw the window back up.
Absolutely.
And that's not to call anybody out. I've been there. I've been that person. Like in all honesty, I have been that person. I'm like, oh, you're not dead. You're fine. And right. Get gas and go on. Now I've been a lot better because like my skill set has grown, my knowledge has grown, and now I'm like, okay, like if I can get into the back door, fill up under your blanket, I'm going to, no matter what it is. And now in the cold, you'll see Roxy rolling out with her back on track boots, but that's something she's been like doing in the winter. Like right. Every winter she's had her back on track, blanket on, neck wrap, leg wrap, hawk wraps, like that's how she hauls to the barrel race, because she's had the surgeries and she's had that done before. So I'm like, I've started it with her when we bought her. I was like, you know what? Like, this is what I'm starting. This is what I'm implementing. And that even kind of goes back to when we bought her. She started out in her back on track leg wraps and a back on track blanket. But by the time, I don't remember where we got to, because we went down to Uvalde, Texas to get her. But by like, we didn't even make it halfway. We didn't even make it to Arkansas. I don't even know where we made it to. I think we were still in Texas. And we stopped, and I got in the stock trailer and just like, I took her boots off, I took her blanket off, and I just put like a very, very light breathable sheet on her, because it was like December. It was cold. And so I was like, that's something that like I could pull off of her. And I like did that because I was like, you're sweating. But she was also on like a 24-hour ride. That was a long ride for her.
Well, and I think too, some of it, the climate that you're driving through makes a difference as well. Yes. You know, like when we leave out from Oklahoma, we have literally left out and it be in the 80s in Oklahoma. And by the time we get out here and get to Flagstaff, it's snowing in Flagstaff, you know, wow. or vice versa, because, you know, Flagstaff, you're at 7,000 feet before you get to the mountain. Like when you're on the interstate, you're at 7,000 feet. You know, or the flip side of that, I've had to start out with blankets on, and then the closer I've gotten to Texas, had to pull my blankets off. So, when you're covering long distances, there can be a lot of inconsistencies with temperature. And I always open the door and go in there and I look to see, how drawn up are they in their underline? Are they shaking anywhere in their legs? Do I see any muscle spasms? Because if I have a horse that's really drawn up and they're kind of shaking, and it's not cold, obviously, then that means they're starting to get fatigued. So I have to decide, do I stop and spend more time at that fuel stop and let them relax and come down a little bit? Or am I reaching a point where maybe I need to pull off for the night, and get that horse off of the trailer? Or, a lot of people don't unload at truck stops. Again, I think it's all situational with the horses. I have no problem unloading mine, but semis don't bother on, like, I'm not worried about having a horse get loose at a truck stop either,
That was
so
actually
to
gonna be
find
my
a
next
safe place to
question.
unload. A lot of times I'll break up a super long trip,
That was
you know.
actually gonna be my next question. For you is, do you feel comfortable unloading? And like, I know this is like your opinion and like what you do, but I was gonna ask if you felt comfortable unloading at truck stops, because I know I did it with Roxy. I've done it with Roxy. Um, so I'm like, I don't mind to unload at truck stops, and I just didn't know, like, how long would you say if you did, like, if you were going on a, say, from Kentucky to Perry, Georgia, it's about a 9 hour, 8 hour drive, maybe shorter than that. It might be 6 hours. I don't know. I'm really bad at mileage and hours and time.
If it was a horse that, like, I was rodeoing on every weekend and they're living on that trailer because our hauling schedule um is allowing that, I don't know that I necessarily pull them off the trailer at 8 hours. I probably would if it was 10. um and but now if I had a horse that was not used to hauling that far, I might add a 45 or an hour a minute stop in there once or twice, and when you think about getting fuel, um, if you go look at the tourist stuff and whatever, it's not hard to waste 40 minutes at a fuel stop, to be honest. And so a lot of times you'll find, if your horse is fit, a lot of times you'll find that's fine. To give you an example, because I have that bumper pull trailer, I do drive a little slower than I did when I had my gooseneck. Um, and like, so when we go to Davina's, there at Redmond Ranch in Oklahoma, when we leave out from Arizona, if I'm in a vehicle, like if I'm just driving where I can be a little more lead footed and don't have to pay attention quite as much, I can drive that with fuel stop straight through, and I can be to Davina's in about 13 and a half hours. When we drive with the horses, it usually takes us 15 hours. So we have gotten where we have drove it straight through, but it's so hard on everybody. We've gotten where I have a place at Albuquerque that I like to stay, and we drive to Albuquerque, which is 6 hours from here, 8 hours from Davina's, and then go from there. We have got where we stop and overnight that, and I find that it's helped my horse significantly. And if I
Also,
was
you
coming,
just froze
oh, all right,
on
well,
my end. I don't know if you froze on your end, but you froze on my end. And
it was saying internet and my connection was unstable for some reason.
oh, well,
But and I would do the same thing driving out to your place. Like, I will probably stop and overnight, because what is it, 11 hours
from Oklahoma
from
or
from Davina's. I think it's like about 11 and a half hours or something
yeah,
like
you're looking
that.
at maybe 12
Yeah,
ish.
and so, for me, we will probably stop, like if we bring Gloria out, we will probably stop on the way out there, part way, just because I don't want her to be so fatigued, especially being this close after a surgery. So I think whether you pull your horse off the trailer or not depends on the horse. I've had some colts that I'm like, I would not unload you on the side of the road. But my thought process is, I'm always working to achieve more confidence in the horse, because I also have that thought in the back of my mind of, okay, if you don't have enough trust in me to not put you in an unsafe situation, are you going to be a fool at the first garbage truck that goes by at Oklahoma City Fairgrounds? Because again, I'm going to come back to like, I don't want to die today. Like so um, that would be something that I would want to work at too. Places I wouldn't unload, if I get out and there's a bunch of junk on the ground or nails, or, it's not a good truck stop, I'm not pulling horses off the trailer. But if there's a nice grassy area that looks safe, I have no problem doing that. I think it all just depends on the horse.
I would agree, 100%.
So let's transition on to being at the show. This is going to be a good podcast, and it's going to be long. People are going to need to break it down into 3 sections.
We're just gonna have to be like, okay, time for a break. Just kidding.
But okay, let's talk. Like I want to lead off with a story here of the learning curve that we started out with. So in '95, we went to the Amarillo NBHA Super Show, and first year we went out there, my horse handled it just fine. Grandma's horse immediately colicked. We almost lost him out there. And again, this is like our first. No, I take that back. That was not our first big show. We had went to Drysdale's in Tulsa before that. But anyway, we were still new to showing on a national or competing on a national level. So we get to the arena there at Amarillo, and they had these completely closed off wooden stalls where the horses couldn't look out and couldn't see each other. And they were also small stalls. They have since torn all of those down and have a lot bigger open stalls in there now. But anyway, Grandma's horse gets there, immediately stresses out, colics. And so she spends the entirety of me trying to run. And of course, I ended up having, with my little horse, having a great weekend, ended up with a national title out of that show. And Grandma spent the whole weekend hiding from me how worried they were that they were going to lose this horse. Because, surgery was just not an option. And so she hand walked this horse for 2 solid days. Everybody switching off. It was a very touch and go situation that I didn't realize how severe the situation was, because they were keeping that from me because they didn't want me to be nervous with running. So we end up getting him turned around. Everything's okay. Well, then the next time we go out there, I have a young horse on the trailer that hadn't been hauled anywhere. And dang, if he doesn't get out there and colic. And we're like, what is going on out here? And some of the people that were used to being out there, they were like, it's the stalls. These closed in trappy stalls don't have good ventilation. They can't see each other. And these horses are panicked. And so they would get out there and they would just simply colic. And every year that we went out there to that show, up until the point that they changed the stalls, there was always somebody that would come in there and their horse would colic because they just were not used to that type of stall. And then we add in the noise and things like that. When we talk about adaptive stress, that when we're talking about adaptive stress in the body, that's the body adapting to a stressful situation so that the next time you have that same stressful situation, your tolerance to it is higher. And so after we got those horses through that and we learned where our error was, then we started stalling across where those horses could look across the aisle. We would ask for stalls across from each other so that they could still see their friend. And it's interesting with horses because we know how well they can hear. They have, so it's not like they couldn't hear their friend next to them. But there was something about losing sight of their friends that just caused a lot of chaos and stress. And, so that was just a learning curve for us starting out, where it's like, oh my, and you run into that a lot at Oklahoma City, where even the stalls are bigger, but you have these solid walls where they can't see their friend. And that causes a lot of distress.
And that's hard because then everything just seems to go downhill. Like when, like anybody gets stressed, like even on like the human side. I mean, what happens when, like a human gets stressed out? Like everything just goes downhill.
Yeah, your digestion gets worse. That's your digestion is one of the first things that gets affected. And then also when you're in that fight or flight, when that sympathetic nervous system is active, then it's hard to get that person or that horse to come down and take a nice deep breath. So you're not getting good oxygen moving through the bloodstream, going to your muscles, going to your digestion. Everything goes into a freeze mode.
And it gets stagnant, and then you just run into like all the other issues that could lead to, it could even leave like colic tying up, and ulcers, or really anything else that could happen. You could even, when they're stressed like that, you could probably set off any of the EPM protozoal that's harbored in the body. And then it's like, why is my horse almost looking neurologic, or why is it spooking at things it's never spooked at before? Well, everything was just kind of everything in the body was set off. Absolutely. And I mean, I can even see it from my side, because I know when I get stressed out, everybody knows I'm running to the bathroom. Everybody knows that's where I'm going, because I stress out my digestion. It says, oh, we're gonna eat one piece of food, we're gonna have one drink. No, girl, no, that's not happening for you today.
Well, I mean, we see the same thing with horses as well.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing we don't see is the phenomenon of like we get nervous and we throw up. Well, we don't see that with our horses, but things running through them, or things not moving through efficiently enough, those are just common problems.
And you see it in their eyes too.
For sure. And I mean, I'll go back to like BBR finals, because again, that's a qualification based on attendance. So you can qualify for that finals at your favorite arena where you're comfortable, and you'll walk past Dr. Ford's booth and he will have his stalls of his veterinary booth full of, and it's all horses on jugs. It's IV after IV after IV. And it's because these horses get there and they're not prepared. So they tie up, they colic. There's always chaos at every veterinary's booth at these shows, because we don't have our horses prepared enough. And like, I want to add a little bit in on noise. So comparing our ears to our horses' ears, I always kind of think about like when you go to the movies and like they have the preview that talks about the surround sound, where it's like all around you and you hear it. They have the opening to the movie where the surround sound kind of goes all the way around the room. That's a good way of thinking about how our horses hear, because our horses' ears rotate 180 degrees and about 90 degrees up and down, or top to bottom. And they have 16 muscles that are responsible for moving the ears. Now, as we know, our ears don't move unless you're one of the people that can do the like little parlor trick of making your ears wiggle. If you're one of those people, it takes 3 pretty measly muscles to be able to move our ears. So what we got is what we got. So, but what's interesting about that though is the human brain identifies sound location with less than 1 degree of error. The equine brain identifies a sound's location with 22 to 30 degrees of error. So it's easier for us to figure out where a sound is coming from than it is our horses. So think about that in the context of, again, the beeping trash trucks going up and down collecting manure, and kids on scooters running up and down the aisles, the golf carts, tarps flapping, the tractors, the announcing, the dogs, horses screaming. When you get a barn full of 500 horses and everybody's whinnying and upset, it changes the vibe. It changes the vibration of that area, and it makes it where horses dial up more, because it's a herd mentality. Hey, if half the population is freaking out, maybe we should freak out too.
100%.
And so, those are the things that cause digestive upset and create an overstimulated horse before we even get a chance to saddle. And the only way to counteract that is to create a confident horse, one that goes, I don't know why that joker over there is freaking out, because there ain't nothing to freak out about. Like, I've been here, done that. Like, it's creating a confident horse, but also having a confident partnership with your horse. And this leads us into how important hand walking is.
Yes. I mean, that's one thing that I do. Even like the horse here, like I've got to get him out and walk him every so often. And I mean, he's just at a stall at a rehab barn. And I mean, think about how important it is for like the horses that don't get out. It's like, and this is not to call anybody out, but it's for the owner who's like, well, I got done running. I'm done. Time to go party with my friends.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, we don't think about our horses. And it's like, if I go work out or I have a really intense ride or I do something and I'm using muscles that like I don't normally use, like the best thing is I want to do is like move. I mean, I've kind of been squirming in my chair because like I'm a little sore. I've been getting up in the mornings and like riding 3 horses. And that's something I haven't done in a long time. And I'm like training one, riding Roxy, and she's easy, and riding Tiny, who's a little bit easier. But like I'm squirming. These horses are sitting there squirming, they're pacing, and this is where like you turn in like these pacers or weavers. And like it's because you're not like walking your horse. Like give that horse the movement that it needs just to like relax. Like I'm squirming because I'm like, okay, I know I need to get up and move, like because my lower back is really tight and my like hamstrings are tight, like everything's tight, and I keep moving my legs and I keep squirming in my chair, but I'm like, this is what these horses feel. And I don't know, like
it's diminished circulation. And I mean, that's the whole thing.
And these horses
when we get finished rolling out this podcast, I'm totally got to go outside. Like I'm going to go touch the earth and groom my horse and walk around, because it's like we have become one with the couch that we're sitting on.
Yeah, this little chair is not doing me any justice. And there's a nice comfy rolly chair off Amazon being ordered, and a desk being ordered so I can sit in my office and not sit outside. And then I'm gonna stand on this TheraPlate after I'm done too.
But the thing about it is like, okay, at least I have a more comfortable setup here. But okay, let's talk about that. Let's talk about the horse that has, you're kind of representing the horse that has minimal shavings on the concrete, that hasn't been out of that stall. And it's like, you know, you're going to be hurting a whole lot more than me because I'm sitting on this comfy chair here. But I want to touch base on, you know, like, okay, people are so willing to buy the cloud boots, to buy the stall mats, to bed down the shavings, but they don't get their horse out and move that horse. You know, again, we circle back to basic fact. That horse is designed to be foraging and walking around 16 hours out of the day looking for food. And, you know, people are so willing to spend money on all this expensive stuff, therapies included, but they won't do the basic free things of get your horse out of that stall 4 or 5 times a day, walk them, go cold hose them. You know, we talk about adequate warm up of it takes 15 or 20 minutes for the synovial fluid in the joints to thin down enough for us to have a proper warm up. When I'm at a show, I'm going to walk no less than 30 before I do my warm up. Now, my warm up may be a quick 10 minutes. You know, it doesn't take very long to get those muscles warmed up and ready to compete, but I'm going to do at least 30 minutes of walking. Now, some of that may be I'm going to do 15 minutes of walking and then saddle and then do another 15 minutes. I'm not saying you've got to camp out saddled on your horse ready to run for an hour and a half. I'm not trying to say that, but I'm not going to just go tack up my horse and just lope warm up and go in the arena. In the same way that, you know, it takes 20 minutes for the lactic acid to cycle back out of the muscles and back out into the body after an intense exercise. If I'm at a show, especially if I'm stalled on concrete, I'm probably going to spend 40 to 45 minutes walking that horse down before they ever go back to the stall. Now, I might break up that by, okay, I'm going to walk to the wash bay. I'm going to cold hose. I'm going to, you know, cold hose you down. Then I'm going to go walk some more. And then we go back to the stall. But the average person could save themselves so much time at the vet booth or time on therapies if they would just walk their horse, because my goodness, that's free. We don't have to, that didn't cost us anything other than our time.
Yeah, I lost my train of thought again. I had something really good. Oh my gosh. This is
Yeah,
very
it'll come back to you.
yeah. But like even just like walking and like going in like with the therapies, it's like, well, no, I do know my train of thought now. Sorry. It's so like when I was younger, I would always be so confused of why I had to get on my horse and walk them so long. Like my poppy would always tell me, okay, like it's time to go get on your horse, like go saddle. And you know, I would have like an hour before, like I would have time to saddle and then I would still have an hour to warm up. And like there was never like really any explanation, but he would always be like, you need to warm up, like you didn't warm up long enough and it showed in your run. Like every like honestly, like my bad runs at like the big super shows that we used to go to, he'd be like, you didn't warm up long enough. And that was even going into my like teen years when we were still going. And
And
well,
probably you
early
were
20s.
running, how old were the horses that you were running at that time? Because a lot of times being a younger person, we're running older horses usually.
Yeah, when I was younger, I was running a little bit older of the horses, but once I turned like 10 or 11, I had a two or 3 year old. I don't remember how old he was, but you know, it was a greenish rider, and then I had a
Right.
greenish horse. But like, I would still kind of walk, and like, it didn't really like click to me at the time. But like now that I think back onto it, I'm like, that's what he was having me do. Like he was having me warm everything up, but like there was no explanation, but it was like, you have to do this. And
Right.
now like it all makes sense. And I'm like, this is why. Even with like my young horse, I was like, you know, we had to keep him going. And like he just, you know, back then he just was like, he would have a good run if he was warmed up. And it took him about an hour to warm up as a younger horse. But that was the one that always ran away with me at the first barrel, which we didn't know like at the time like what injury he had. But now like I think about it, man, he had a stifle issue.
Right.
And then
And so he probably had back tension as well. So
yep.
the long warm up time was helping limber the back up.
And I had no idea, but my poppy, he was like, you go and you warm this horse up, and if I had a good run, it was like you did your warm up right. And that was not, oh, I'm gonna go lope circles. It was, no, I'm gonna go out there and I'm gonna walk for a very long time. And it was, you're gonna walk this, and even going like out at the Pink Buckle, Roxy gets hand walked like every like few hours. And feel like it might be like 2 or 3 hours she's out of the stall, no matter how deep her bedding is.
Right.
Like I bet her stall, like I was telling you before we started recording, I think we took like 15 bags out there, 10 or 15, and I loaded it down. My poppy's like, is this actually necessary? And I said, yes, for this princess, it is necessary. And
The
I
thing
was
is,
just
she
trying to
has
do
a
it.
lot of priors. You know,
Yep.
you are not hauling a perfectly healthy horse that's never had a soundness issue. So, you know, she's going to require more than the average horse.
Yes. And like we did that, in which I didn't pack her feet or anything like that because like she was just comfortable. And last year, like I was doing a lot more rodeo and I was doing a lot more hauling versus this year. But I still think she's great, but that's neither here nor there. But like this year, like I'll still like bed her stall, even though like we've got new stalls at the Lazy E that I've never been in. So she gonna have a lot of shavings packed, and she's gonna have to get out and have PMF. I'm lucky enough to have my PMF blanket, but she's still gonna get out and walk. I'm not just gonna get out, put the blanket on her, and throw her back in.
Yes.
Because I want her to be limber as well.
And also too, like I want to add in something on therapies. Like, okay, here's a statement a lot of people aren't going to like, and I do therapy for a living too. So, you know, big believer in therapies, but I'm telling you, getting your horse out and walking will do as much, if not more, for performance in most cases than just doing therapy alone. Because when we're thinking about what we're looking to achieve with our therapies, whether it be, you know, laser, PMF, you know, vibration plate, whatever therapy we're using, in most cases, we are looking to increase circulation, decrease pain and inflammation, and help the body on a systemic level. So bringing that horse down out of flight, you know, creating more focus for a run. And so even if you're spending all the money doing the therapies there, if you are not doing the basics of creating movement for a movement animal, you're not going to get what you're looking for out of the therapies.
No,
And
I would agree.
yeah, you know, absolutely with that. And so, you know, not to say that it's not worth it to do therapies there at the race because, you know, I love a good salt spa. I love the cryo cabins that are there. You know, like again, I am a huge advocate for therapy. That's what I do for a living. But I would rather forget my PMF blanket at home and walk my horse than I would to let my horse stand in a stall all day long and depend on that blanket. Now, in a rehab barn, there are instances where horses maybe have a fracture, a pelvis fracture, or something like that, where they cannot come out of a stall for 30 days and can't even be hand walked. And I'm telling you from our experience, you work really, really, really hard to keep circulation moving through the body on those horses because you're in a trauma type situation where they can't get out and move naturally. You know, so there's always a reason for that, but that's not going to be a horse that's ever going to be at a show.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a fractured pelvis horse or whatever at a horse show, you might not have the run.
We got bigger problems there.
Yeah,
but
I would
think,
like touch on.
Yeah, go for it.
No, like touching on the therapies like at the show. Like I feel like everybody wants to go spend that money, like you were talking, and like the cheapest thing and the best way to do is like the walking for these movement horses. But it's also like hard for me to even be like, if this hasn't been done before to this horse, like why are you just now wanting it at the show? Like I understand, like you're trying to get the circulation, you want your horse to feel good because you're in a very stressful situation. Because obviously I do therapy for a living. I've got a booth set up at NBHA State that I'm sure people are gonna come and want a PMF blanket or a nebulizer or whatever it may be. But it's like, it's hard for me to be like, you haven't started this, like how is your horse gonna react to it? Because there's different protocols for like a pre-race, a post-race, you know, whatever
chronic issue, that type of thing.
Yeah.
And that's like the difference in an experienced therapist like you that is going to explain, you know, we're not going to throw the kitchen sink at this horse at a show and try to overstimulate them. Another great example of that is like when we would take a booth to Little Britches finals where we're working with youth horses. We did not do treatments on those horses in the same manner that we would at a high-end futurity or something like that, because I'm not trying to take some 26-second pole horse that needs to be a 26-second pole horse for the skill set of the rider and make him go run a 22-second pole pattern. Because what if our kid falls off at a show of that's that large and that they've worked their entire year to qualify for? You know, a lot of times I end up telling clients what we rolled into this joint with is what we've got. Now we can talk about where some areas where we were not prepared and what to improve on for next time. We can keep our horse at the base level that we came in with, but in a lot of instances, you know, now there's also a difference in a person that, you know, has a horse that is functioning optimally and they go, hey, I need to take 2 or 3 tenths off the clock. All right, well, we're going to try our best that we can without overstimulating the horse. Because I'm going to throw something in there also too about, I'm going to use PMF as an example. If we overstimulate dehydrated muscles, so our horse that's not drinking adequately, and we pulse those dehydrated muscles, we will create excess soreness. If you do not drink enough water after body work, after cold laser, after PMF, etc., and your muscles are already dehydrated, they will get crampy and they will get sore.
That's why even like at shows, like if I kind of like did it on the side, if somebody like knew that I was going to be there and knew that I had my equipment, like I always stay and make sure their horses drink. Because I don't want it coming back to me and being like, well, my horse is sore now than when you worked on it. And I'm like, well, I didn't, like, if I left, I didn't see if it drank. But most of the time, like, I've seen a lot of horses drink. They're like, my horse isn't drinking, work on it. And it's like magically drinking.
Yeah, absolutely.
It made it thirsty. It took all of that through there. And it's like, oh, man. And even horses here at the barn and my horses too, like, I make sure that they drink. Because I'll throw the blanket on them and then, you know, we go out and work and I'm like, well, I'm going to take you to the water tank and see if you want to drink before we start any more work out here. Because I don't want them out there tying up, because I've had instance of the mare tying up, not from work, but I mean, she tied up and I'm like, okay, you've got to have electrolytes in you. Like, you've got to have all the water. Like, you've got to drink. And she's a pretty good drinker. But I'm just like, I'm like watching these horses and making sure, like, after anything that I do, I'm like, you better drink so I can like know that they don't get any more sore. Because I don't want
And I don't have a problem telling an customer or a potential customer, hey, you need to go get some electrolyte paste, or here's an electrolyte strip. Go put this on, put the horse in the stall, let him get hydrated, and then bring him back.
Yeah.
There, and again, that's that experienced therapist, and some of it's just general horsemanship. When you are selecting people to do therapies on your horse at a show, I would investigate the skill set of that person. Are they there just to make money and they're just on to the next one, putting equipment on, or are they actually spending time with you and trying to teach you something? Because that is the difference in an established therapist versus someone that's just there to make money. I always try to give my clients a piece of educational information about their horse every time they come by the booth.
Yeah, and that's normally like if I ever work on a horse, which I haven't got to set up an official booth. Well, this will be my second official like booth setup. And like, I want to be able to teach these owners. Like, when they come to me, like, I'm going to like teach them. And I get to yapping. I'm the biggest yapper. So like, I'm obviously going to talk like about your horse, like not like just to like get a connection like with you or the owner. Like, I'm going to probably teach you even how to do the stretches. It's like, so if I work on a horse, say on Friday, instead of them, they can still pay me. But instead of them paying me every single day, it's like, here, why don't I teach you how to do these stretches? That way you can continue them at home. Mm-hmm. It's like, here's your little piece of like advice. Like, this is where we need to work on. Like, and they get a free assessment with me, because I'm just like, I want to help you with your horse. Like, I'm like, thanks to you, like one of the biggest like educating. Like, I love to educate people and help them like with their horses, no matter what it may be, even if it is at a show.
For sure. And I think that too, that also leads to repeat business. I mean, that to me, giving people information and knowledge and empowering that knowledge that you're giving them, there's no better marketing out there than that right there. It's like we're honestly teaching you as we work. And I think that separates your mediocre people running equipment versus your true therapist.
And like, that kind of like goes into, I think, a little bit of like, I think us as experienced therapists, like, we're not trying to tell you that everything is wrong with your horse. I think it's more of like, here's where we can improve. Like, here's where we are, like, let's improve here. And it's not like we're out here like dogging on you, like, this is like far-fetched. Like, you have a U in your neck, you have a stifle issue, this is why your horse is doing this. Like, it's not like we're out here to do this. Like, I think we're more or less explaining like, hey, like, this is caused from this. Like, we are breaking it down into a chain of events, like, for the customer to be like, or the owner to be like, oh, like, this is like why my horse looks like this, or why my horse feels like this, or why he's acting like this. It's not to be like, you just have a bad horse.
Well, and sometimes too, when we're at a local show where where you can revisit with those people again, it's like, okay, here's what we can do today, and come back to the booth and we can set up a plan or reschedule an appointment to go through a full assessment, because I also don't want to overwhelm somebody, because again, what we rolled into the parking lot with is what we got. Like, there is no Jesus level miracle happening at this barrel race. And so and I also think too, there's something to be said about working within our ethical borders. Like, okay, let's say I have somebody show up and they want me to cold laser or PMF a big swollen spot that is hot and has heat. Chances are I'm going to turn that horse away if they are planning on running that horse, because I do not want to cover anything up. I don't want to hide anything. And if you're going to choose to run the horse that's hot with heat that maybe the vet has also told you to scratch, I'm not going to put my name on that service that I have done. And, it's like, if you wanna run him and he tears a suspensory, you tear a deep flexor, that's on you. I'm not gonna be a part of it. So it's using good judgment with equipment. And I know we could talk about this. This is probably a whole topic on its own. So, those are just things to think about, having realistic expectations, having some sort of takeaway from the therapist that you're working with, and are they working within their ethical boundaries? So from that, let's move on to the recovery between runs. If we have a horse that is already depleted on our first run, chances are they're not going to be able to recover fast enough to continue to get better each day. We have to have a horse that is functionally strong enough, and their basic needs are met, and we're on track with our athlete. That's why you see so many hit barrels on the last day. Horses start to weaken and they start to anticipate, owners, the rider, think about yourself walking on concrete for a week and how tired you get at the end of that. Riders aren't riding as strong as they were on day one, because you've been hauling shavings in and out, hauling water, walking on concrete. You're fatigued, your horse is fatigued. And those are the things that we have to keep in mind.
That's why you see
Where
all these maturity riders, they ride strong and they're like going, but they go and go and go, like they don't stop.
there's also
Like,
a better base level of fitness with the rider than
yeah,
the average person as well.
I would 100% agree. It's like, don't go in, like, don't go in thinking you're going to win the 1D when you haven't fully prepared yourself and like your horses to run those 3 times. I need you to make your ticket game and like talk about the ticket game sometime, because
We're gonna have to put that together. We need somebody
yes,
that so that's a topic for another day, but we totally
yes,
need to do that.
that's, I had to bring it up. I had to put it in there so people could be like, oh, there's ticket game, because that is like
Absolutely.
my favorite. It's like, don't go like, but like don't go in expecting to win the 1D when you haven't trained not only like yourself but like your horse's self to win the 1D. Like, am I
Absolutely.
expecting to go win the 1D? No. Why? Because I'm running a business and this is hard. And it's my first year doing this. Now I'm sure I'll get better. But like, I haven't physically trained at the gym myself. So I'm like, okay, I'm not going to expect to go in and win the 1D. Do I want to? Absolutely. But am I going to? No.
But you're also going to have a better base level of fitness than somebody that works an office job, that has a very sedentary job, because you're in that barn stretching horses all day long. You're doing body work. You're going up and down your hay loft. You're filling hay bags and carrying, like, there's a lot of heavy, not that it's a replacement for the gym, but at least you have a foundation of fitness because of the work you do day in and day out. Let's think about the person that wants to take 4 or 5 head of horses to the barrel race, but maybe they work an office job and their idea of fitness is putting these horses on a walker day in and day out, and that's the only thing that they do. It's going back to our futurity trainers. They're active. The amount of horses that they have in their barn, they're moving manure carts and lifting hay bales, and aside from fitness, that happens at a gym, they have a pretty good foundation just because of what they do day in and day out. If you're riding 10 and 12 or 15 head of horses a day, you're going to be pretty fit just from doing that.
They're not going to be sore like me from riding 3 horses and doing all the things. And I'm like, ow. But they're going to be a lot better.
So to kind of wrap us up here, talk about having the horses, like, getting back home, having our horses ready for the next race. Like, let's talk a little bit about what happens once we get back home.
I mean, obviously, well, that sounds terrible. That did not come out right. Well, coming back home, it's like a lot of people want to turn their horses out. They went to a big barrel race. They went to a 3-day weekend barrel race, and it's like, well, I'm going to go and give my horses time off. And that's okay to an extent, but like we talked about in the very beginning, it takes, it's been proven on ultrasound for it to be like 3 days to lose muscle tone. Well, if you're going to go run this race and then come home and turn your horse out, well, you're just gonna kind of start losing things. And yes, the horses are getting the movement because they're their natural grazers, but they're not getting their like engaged and correct movement. If
For
that
sure.
makes, and they're
So,
not getting like,
in other words, we don't want to bring that horse home and let them sit and then be like, well, we're going to go to a 3-day barrel race the next weekend and not do anything in between.
yeah,
It doesn't mean we got to come home and work barrels, but I like to come home and like keep riding. Like maybe I back off and all I do is get on and walk for 3 days in a row, or maybe I do give that horse a day or two off, and then I start back with my foundational exercise. But when we bring home a horse that's depleted, we should be investigating what do we need to do to not end up so depleted the next time. And a lot of people don't. They just kick them out, and it's just like, well, what we got's what we got. And at this point, you have to start making better decisions for your horse, or don't go. Don't go to the barrel race. Don't enter something if it's going to be chaos all the time, because what you're going to end up with is a horse with ulcers, a horse that bleeds, a horse that won't go in the gate. You're going to end up with all of these problems that can be fixed for free with a little time and effort. Not to say that we're never going to have to inject anything just because we ride it. Not to say that it's a replacement for a good veterinary system, especially if you're hauling a lot. But there are so many things that you can do for free once you get back home. Kind of to circle back to the equipment thing. Everybody wants to come tearing in the door of a race and have all this equipment run on their horse, but then they don't do anything, or have their horse adjusted, have them chiropractic, have whatever done, but then they don't do anything to maintain that in between races. So you really, one, you're not getting your money's worth, but two, you're not actually progressing your athlete to the level that you're probably wanting.
Right. And it's like going back to like the free stuff, like that's not just movement. Like if you've got an ice maker or you've got a Dollar General down the road, go and get a bag of ice. I'm sure most every horse owner has fly boots. Ice your horse's legs. And like that even goes to even doing it at the shows. Like that's free. Like, well, you've got to pay a little bit. But if you've got the fly boots, ice is cheap. Like
get you a cooler and go to one of those ice machines where you push the button and for like $8 it fills your cooler up.
And it's like, keep doing that, like, because you can do it at home. Like, do the stretches at home. If you have your horse worked on, like you were saying, like they don't do it at home and they don't continue it. Like, here's your chance of you got this opportunity to go through, have your horse worked on or adjusted or whatever. And they're like, okay, like continue this at home. Well, they don't continue it at home. Like they're just losing it. And they see you at the next show and they're like, well, my horse is now sore again. Here's your chance to like continue the stretching at home. Because I know if they like come through me, I'm going to teach them how to do like the easy stretches. Like you paid me for my time. Well, here's your education of the stretching and what you can do. And like, here's your resistance and all the things. So it's like, that's something you can continue to do. That's cheap. The stretching is free and cheap. The movement is free and cheap. I'm sure you could find even like poles on the ground, because that's my favorite thing to do after like a long barrel race. Like Roxy might get a day off, but then she goes back into work and she might, walk up and down an incline, or she might walk across some ground poles, or she might just get on a long lunge line and just walk some circles, like the correct perfect circle, instead of like kind of keeping her like in a smaller area. I might just like ask her to go into a bigger perfect circle. And so it's like, okay, we're still getting that movement and these horses are still getting their movement. Or I might even get the balance pads out on her and she might stand with the balance pads.
I think another big takeaway there is the fact that you own a rehab with multiple pieces of equipment, but you're still doing the foundational things in the same way that when I owned that equipment and it was in my barn, we still did all of the foundational things that we expected our owners to maintain once we sent that horse home.
Because you can even get memory foam, like not just saying balance pads, because like you could go to the Dollar General and they've got memory foam, or just like something squishy and put these horses on there. And just let them
letting them
stand.
adapt to different surfaces.
Because it's like, oh, like this is different, and like you're starting to build on that foundation, like we've been talking about. Because if you don't have a foundation, it's like a house. If you don't have the foundation of the house, your house is going to crumble and fall beneath you.
Yeah. And I think like I'm gonna leave one final takeaway, because I know we've been on here a long time. But if your horse continues to be depleted, exhausted, manic, stuck in flight at the shows, that will spiral into the dread of even getting on the trailer and going to the show. Because, at their root, it's a flight animal that wants to feel safe, wants to feel nurtured in an environment. And when we nurture them, they will really perform and enjoy their job. But when you have that horse that's starting to develop an alley issue and things like that, chances are it's because you are missing some foundational things. So all these people that feel like they are desperate for sedation and calming paste and all these quick fixes, you're not addressing the problem, and eventually it's going to snowball into something huge that may cost that horse their career, and it may cost you getting hurt as a rider. So final takeaway here, like, you're responsible for your horse. You're the one making decisions for this horse. Did you set them up to succeed, or did you fail your horse in the preparation, and now you're going to have to deal with the aftermath of that? And I think that's a good note to end on there. And
because if I say anything else, I'll just keep talking. So
next podcast.
I know, they say, well, we got another one to make.
Absolutely. So thank y'all for tuning in, and happy trails, y'all.